The eviction notice felt heavier than a single sheet of paper had any right to be. Carol Miller stared at the crisp, cream-colored stationery, the embossed logo of the Blackwood Development Group, mocking her from the top. It wasn't the first letter, but it was the final one. 30 days. 30 days to vacate the property she'd poured her life into for 37 years. The Dusty Spoon Diner, off a stretch of highway near Waynesville, Missouri, wasn't just a business. It was the place she'd met her husband, Frank. It was the place they'd raised their son before he joined the Army. It was the place Frank had left to her when the cancer took him 6 years ago. Now, a man named Caldwell, with a smile as slick as his hair, was going to bulldoze it for luxury condos nobody in Pulaski County could afford. He'd bought the whole block last spring. First came the friendly offer, a lowball figure that was an insult to Frank's memory. When she'd refused, the friendliness had vanished. Her rent, stable for a decade under the old landlord, was tripled overnight, citing a vague clause in the original lease. Then came the inspectors. A man from the county health department, a department she'd had a perfect record with for decades, suddenly found a dozen phantom violations. A fire marshal declared her wiring, untouched and approved for 40 years, a potential catastrophic hazard. Her regulars, mostly soldiers from Fort Leonard Wood and local families, were loyal, but even they started to thin out. The constant presence of official-looking vehicles and men with clipboards in her parking lot created a cloud of unease. It felt like a siege. Her savings, meant for a comfortable, if modest, retirement, were evaporating into a lawyer's retainer. The lawyer, a good man named Peterson, was honest. "Carol," he'd said last week, his face grim, "they have deeper pockets. They can tie us up in a court until you're broke. It's a war of attrition, and you're outgunned." She folded the notice, the paper crackling in protest, and tucked it under the cash register. The morning sun streamed through the front windows, illuminating the dust motes, dancing over the worn red vinyl of the booths. It was quiet, too quiet for a Tuesday. She wiped down the already spotless chrome counter, her reflection a tired-looking woman of 62 with flour on her cheek and a deep weariness in her eyes. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. It was the kind of bone-deep isolation that made you wonder if you'd ever done a single thing that mattered in the world. 22 years ago, it wasn't the sun streaming in, but the hard, percussive beat of a summer thunderstorm. The rain came down in sheets, turning the highway into a black mirror. Carol was mopping up, getting ready to close, when the squeal of tires was followed by a sickening crunch of metal on gravel. She'd rushed to the door and peered out into the deluge. A motorcycle, a big Harley, was on its side in the soft shoulder, its single headlight pointing crookedly at the sky. A figure was slowly, painfully, getting to his feet. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing the big kitchen first aid kit and a handful of dry towels, she'd pushed out into the storm. He was young, maybe 25, with a scraggly beard and long hair plastered to his face. He was wearing a leather vest with a patch on the back, a skull with wings or something like it, but the rain made it hard to see. He was favoring his right leg, and blood was trickling from a nasty gash on his forearm, mixing with the rainwater. "You all right?" she'd asked, her voice steady over the roar of the storm. He looked up, startled, his eyes wary. "Just a spill. A deer jumped out. I'm fine." He wasn't fine. He was soaked, shivering, and bleeding. "Nonsense," she'd said, in the same tone she used on her son when he tried to hide a fever. "Get inside before you catch your death." The bike's not going anywhere. He'd hesitated for a beat, a flicker of pride or suspicion in his eyes, but the cold and the pain must have won out. He limped behind her into the warm, dry diner. She sat him in a booth, handed him the towels, and got to work on his arm. He winced as she cleaned the gravel from the cut with antiseptic, but he didn't complain. "What's your name?" she asked, wrapping the arm in clean gauze. "Stitch," he'd mumbled. "That a nickname?" "It is now, I guess." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a thick mug of black coffee and a plate piled high with meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. "On the house," she said, setting it down before he could protest. "You need to eat." He ate like a man who hadn't seen a hot meal in a week. "Between bites," he explained. He was riding ahead of his club, on his way to a rally in Sturgis. The storm had separated them. His wallet and phone were in a saddlebag that had been torn open in the crash, its contents likely scattered across a half-mile of wet highway. He was stuck. Carol just refilled his coffee. "You can wait here. I'll stay open until your friends find you." And so they waited. He told her about growing up in Indiana, about learning to work on bikes from his old man. He never said what his club did, and she never asked. To her, he wasn't a biker. He was just a young man far from home who'd had a bad break. When the headlights of a dozen motorcycles finally cut through the rain around 2 a.m., he'd stood up, looking awkward. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you. I don't have any money on me, but I can get one of my brothers to—" She'd waved him off. "Don't you worry about it. Just be safe on the road, and get that arm looked at by a real doctor." His friends, big, intimidating men who filled the doorway, looked from him to her. Stitch said something to the one who seemed to be in charge, a man with a gray-streaked beard and piercing eyes. The older man looked at Carol, a long, appraising look, and then gave a slow, deliberate nod. Stitch turned back to her. "We won't forget this, ma'am." She just smiled, handed him a slice of apple pie wrapped in foil for the road, and watched them go. By the next morning, mopping the muddy floor, she'd already half forgotten the incident. It was just a stormy night. It was just the right thing to do. She never thought of it again. The rumble started so low she felt it in the soles of her worn-out sneakers before she heard it. It grew steadily, a deep, thoracic vibration that rattled the coffee mugs on the shelf. Carol looked up from her ledger, frowning. It sounded like an earthquake, or maybe the army was doing heavy maneuvers over at the base. She walked to the front door and looked out. Her breath caught in her throat. Coming down the highway in a staggered, disciplined formation was a river of steel and chrome. Motorcycles. Not 5 or 10. It looked like 100. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, their engines a synchronized roar that drowned out the sound of everything else. They turned, one by one, into her parking lot. The lot, usually half empty, was suddenly filled with gleaming Harleys, their riders dismounting with practiced ease. They were all wearing the same cut, the same leather vest. On the back was a patch, a skull with silver wings. Carol's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Caldwell must have sent them. A new kind of intimidation. Bikers. The oldest scare tactic in the book. Her hand went to the phone behind the counter, her thumb hovering over the 9 and the 1. But they weren't surrounding the diner. They weren't yelling or making a scene. They were just there. They parked their bikes in neat rows, taking up every single spot. Some leaned against their machines talking in low voices. Others just stood, arms crossed, watching the highway. They were a wall, a silent, leather-clad fortress. The diner door opened, a small bell tinkling incongruously over the low rumble of idling engines. A man stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard that was more salt than pepper. He had laugh lines around his eyes, but the eyes themselves were serious. He took off his sunglasses and scanned the diner, his gaze finally landing on her. He walked to the counter and sat on one of the stools. Carol's hands were trembling slightly as she picked up a coffee pot. "Can I help you?" Her voice was tight. The man looked at her, a long, searching look. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of genuine recognition. He pushed up the sleeve of his leather jacket, revealing a faded, jagged scar on his forearm. "It depends," he said, his voice a low gravel. "You still make that meatloaf?" Carol froze, the coffee pot halfway to the mug. She looked from the scar to his face. Really looked. The scraggly beard was gone, replaced by a formidable one. The boyish frame had filled out with the muscle and heft of middle age. But the eyes were the same. Wary, but with a spark of decency in them. "Stitch?" she whispered, the name coming back to her from a place she hadn't visited in 2 decades. He nodded. "It's been a while, Carol." She slowly put the coffee pot down, her mind reeling. What is all this? What are you doing here?" 22 years ago, you gave a cold, broke kid a hot meal and a dry place to wait for his family, he said, his voice simple and direct. You didn't ask who he was. You didn't ask for a dime. You just helped. He gestured with his thumb toward the window at the sea of men and machines. "Family's back in town. We heard you were having some trouble with your landlord." Carol sank onto the stool opposite him, the strength gone from her legs. How did you even know?" "We keep our ears open," Stitch said vaguely. "Word gets around. A brother from the chapter down in Springfield saw the story in the local paper. He recognized the name of the diner. We make it a point to remember our debts." For the next week, the Dusty Spoon Diner became the busiest it had been in years. The bikers operated with a quiet, efficient rhythm. They came in shifts. They filled every booth, ordering coffee, pie, and plates of meatloaf. They paid in cash, always leaving generous tips. They were meticulously polite, calling her ma'am, holding the door for the few brave regulars who ventured in, and clearing their own tables. They never spoke of Caldwell. They never made a threat. They simply existed. Their presence changed everything. When one of Caldwell's surveyors showed up, he took one look at the 40 large men silently watching him from the parking lot, got back in his pristine SUV, and drove away. The fire marshal's office called to say there had been a clerical error, and her inspection was, in fact, perfectly fine. The story hit the local news. Biker Club shows support for beloved local diner. The reporter interviewed Stitch, who just said, "We're just here visiting an old friend. Best damn apple pie in Missouri." The story went viral. Suddenly, Carol wasn't alone.